Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, Jeff Currier, and Royce Coop, where we break down the stories shaping our country.
You've got, let's double the spending on CBC. Let's put this bullet train in place that is never going to get there, but we'll just pad everybody's pockets with it. And nothing on the U.S. tariffs. Nothing.
Well, the premiers went down and tried to do the charm offensive, but that's not going to work.
Twice.
I think we've talked about that before. That's it's an act of naivete to think that because we're nice guys, we're going to go down and they're going to be nice guys and listen to us. They don't care. Mm-hmm. They're going to look out for their own interests, and that's what they're doing, and that's what we need to do. And as you just said, Kevin, there is no leadership coming from Ottawa on this file.
Yeah, it's we're realizing there's very little that we can do to change Trump's mind. He's going to do what he's going to do, and if it's going to be tariffs, that's going to be it. The best thing we can do at this point is look inward, think about what we can do as a country to insulate ourselves from these sorts of changes in the United States. We've seen some premiers take some really good steps in terms of resource development, in terms of development in their provinces. We saw Mark Carney say that in English, that he was going to use the federal government's emergency powers to force through some of these projects, including pipeline projects that would allow us to get energy products overseas to markets other than the US. But then, and I wrote about this tomorrow, in French, he said that he would never force a pipeline on Quebec. So the old Liberal Party traditions say one thing in English, the total opposite in French. Carney's not even the leader, and already he's blowing the dust off the 100-year-old Liberal playbook.
I don't even know why why this would be a problem. I would just simply go to Quebec and say, look, we're building a pipeline, we're putting it through. If you say no, we're not giving you a dime. You're not getting any transfer payments. You're not getting any money from the federal government. Not a dime. Not a cent. Until that pipeline goes through, you're not going to get a cent. So I guess that goes back to what you said, Jeff, that politicians are afraid to do that because that's where all the votes come from, right? Montreal or from the Quebec and from Ontario. So they're afraid to say what you said. Maybe that's why they're such hypocrites.
Well, certainly that's where the Liberal vote base is. The Liberals depend on the province of Quebec to keep them in power, and it largely has. For that province's history, they've predominantly voted Liberal, a few exceptions here and there, but generally Quebec can be counted upon to vote Liberal. And if Carney is telling Quebec what it wants to hear, that's great because, Quebec, I think there's this impression or there used to be an impression in Canada, the ROC as they call it, the rest of Canada outside of Quebec. There's Quebec and then there's ROC. Yeah. Well, there was a sense at one time, I think, and Royce should speak to this as well, that if the rest of us, and this was around the time where the separatist movement was powerful, if the rest of us just learned how to speak French, that they would love us. The fact of the matter is Quebec doesn't give a damn if we speak French or not. They don't care. It's nice that we do. But and that could lead us into a whole conversation about official bilingualism and whether or not it's worked. We can do that. We can save that for another one. But the fact is that Quebec doesn't care if some kid in Red Deer learns how to speak French. They really don't. And if Alberta is having difficulty getting its oil overseas, Quebec's not really particularly concerned about that.
So it will have them money.
So it will. Well, you can't just tear up you can't just say we're going to end your equalization payments because there's a formula that's entrenched. All right, so that formula would have to be changed.
Yeah, but couldn't you use your emergency powers to say you're not getting any money?
I don't know, Royce, could they? Could a federal government theoretically deny a province equalization payments?
I'm not sure. I mean, the equalization payments are now in the charter. The principle of equalization is in the charter, but there's lots of things the federal government can do. Carney is actually right. There's lots of things you can do to actually force a pipeline on a province. Jeff is right. Quebec has been kind of the cornerstone of Liberal success throughout most of the 20th century. But Quebec is not as important as it once was. It hands a lot of its seats to the Bloc Québécois. It just pulls those seats out of the game. And so they're really less powerful than they used to be. There's opportunities here for a government that actually cares about things like pipelines, like getting our products to markets other than the U.S. to do these sorts of things without worrying too much about how Quebec is going to react to it. In terms of bilingualism, yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. Bilingualism was never about Quebec, in my view. Quebec, they've got their own provincial government. They're their own society. They don't care what people in Alberta are doing. Official bilingualism was really a reflection of what a kind of liberal elite, central Canadian liberal elite wanted the country to look like. It doesn't have much to do with Quebec or Quebecers.
So listening to you, and it'd be interesting to see what both of you think about this. Then is it the Canadian parliamentary system? Is it our system that's hurting the country? Like we have so many parties, right? The Bloc Québécois comes out of Québécois. We're giving them all this federal money, but they won't vote on behalf of Canada. They want to vote on behalf of Quebec. They're only focused on what happens in Quebec. And then you've got 5 or 6 other parties that are it's ruining the votes, right? I mean, you're spreading our votes so thin that we end up in the mess that we're in. And maybe it's time we sat back and said, well, maybe we got to change our system. I don't know. I'll leave it to you to discuss.
It's not quite like the Knesset with, that it's that fractured, but you're right. The votes do get spread around. And I think we mentioned last week that theoretically, with 35% of the popular vote in every riding, you could theoretically win every seat in the House of Commons. So the old British parliamentary democracy system worked fairly well when you were talking about a 2 or maybe 3-party system, but it's only happened, I think, 4 or 5 times in Canada's history where the winning party garnered 50% of the popular vote or more. For example, Pierre Trudeau never once got 50% of the popular vote. The last prime minister to do it was Brian Mulroney. And it's only happened, I think 4 or 5 times. Royce, you might correct me on that, but I think you'd have to go back. I think Diefenbaker had 50% at one point, and prior to him, I think Mackenzie King might have had just over 50%. I'd have to go back and look at that. But so here's the question that I would ask Royce, because what's the most salient feature of a democracy? To my mind, the most salient feature of a democracy is not free elections. It's that the will of the majority prevails. Right? That's what a democracy is, right? That not the tyranny of the majority, but the will of the majority prevails. Yeah. There's a caveat, as somebody once said: democracy can't just be 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner. But I didn't make that up. I wish I had. But the will of the majority should prevail. But the will of the majority does not prevail in Canada because we don't have governments that have 50% or more of the support of the people, or the support of 50% of the people. So do we still have a democracy?
Yeah, I mean, the governments used to be more likely to get 50% of the vote right up until like the 1920s, when we started to get minor parties running and actually winning seats. And so it's just sort of and the electoral system is built to produce majority governments, even if parties they don't have a majority of the votes. And so, it's saying that the majority will should be represented by the government. Yeah, I think if you're a Democrat, you agree with that. But there's lots of different ways to get at that. And the way we get at that in Canada is you have to win in a certain number of seats. And sometimes you get kind of weird outcomes. In the last few elections, we've had the Conservatives got more votes than the Liberals, and fewer seats. The Liberals still get to form a government despite that they're actually less popular than the Conservative Party. I think in the current moment with Trump, with tariffs, I think our institutions are okay. I think the problem is with the government. We've had 9 years of a government that put roadblocks in front of natural resource projects, that made it hard to build pipelines that were necessary for precisely this moment. The Energy East, which was we couldn't build it because of Quebec, because of the federal government, because the federal environment minister, was exactly for this particular moment. We needed to get products to places other than the United States. Instead, the federal government was intruding in provincial jurisdiction and daycare and the school lunch programs, instead of doing stuff that the federal government should have been doing, coordinating projects that were clearly in the national interest. If a different party is going to do that, then that's how you fix some of these problems. And I'm not worried about institutions. I think the problem is with the government.
And I think you're right. I mean, Trudeau's basically been social engineering since the day he got elected. That's all he really spends his time doing, right? DEI, DEI. But I think the party system, and what I'm hearing is that we have too many parties, and maybe we need legislation that says if you're going to be a federal party, you have to run somebody in every seat, or you can't be on the ballot. That might be an option, right? I'm just spitballing here, but if you're going to run for federal politics, I'd rather that you have representation all across the country. Then, like, it should be fair for everybody. It's almost like, and when I talk about that, one of the reasons I bring that up is because now there's a new conservative party in Alberta called the Republican Party of Alberta. I don't know if either one of you heard about that.
No.
The Edmonton, one of our colleagues at the Edmonton Journal had, I believe, reported on that. It's another Alberta party that was a conservative party. They've now changed their name, rebranding. They're coming out strong as the Republican Party of Alberta. I don't really want to get into it. It's like, fine, that's great. But it made me think about the recent debate that the PC party of Manitoba had in Brandon. I watched it online, and I have never been so disappointed. It was a joke. I got to be quite honest. The questions that they asked, the way it was set up, I thought it was designed poorly. They missed an opportunity. They missed an opportunity, and they are a terrible, terrible opposition. Yes, I have some people that I know that are current MLAs for that party. They're nice people. I have respect for them as human beings, but my goodness, that party is lost. And I'm sure you both have probably watched it, maybe not. I know, Royce, you watched the debate. You have some thoughts on that.
Yeah,